Good evening and good Erev Shabbos, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me. The greatest moment in all of human history, the moment of divine revelation of Maimon Har Sinai, is of course the centerpiece of this week's Parsha, Parshas Yisro. The Torah describes the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself and speaks directly to millions of people. The greatest moment, the most impactful moment in all of our history. And perhaps because this was such a dramatic event, because this moment of divine revelation is almost unmatched and unparalleled, the Haftarah that we read for Parshas Yisro is the description of Yeshayahu Hanavi of his greatest revelation. The greatest revelation ever experienced by any prophet. Yeshayahu and Yechezkel Hanaviim both experience what is called a Maisa Merkava. They experience something which gives them some sort of vision, an image in their mind of the divine chariot, an idea that we can speak about only metaphorically, but very difficult to understand in any sort of literal sense. And the Haftarah describes the way Yeshayahu sees this glorious vision. He sees the way the Malachim standing there, approaching the chariot of God and saying the pasuk that we say each and every day, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzivakos. And Yeshayahu recoils. He sees this and he pulls back in great wonder and amazement, and he says the following: Oy li ki nidmesi, ki ish tmeis fasayim anochi. Oy li ki nidmesi means, woe is to me, ki nidmesi. So the Rashi says over here, what does that mean? Because I am like dead. Nidmesi from the Lashon Misa, Mace. I feel like this is completely taken the life out of me. Ki ish tmeis fasayim anochi, because I am a person of impure lips. It's as if he's saying I'm completely unworthy to behold such an awesome vision. So here, Yeshayahu Hanavi, one of the greatest prophets, sees something that he finds almost too much to bear, and he experiences this by reciting these words, Oili ki nidmesi. Woe is to me, because this moment, it's almost like it has killed me. Now, the Dubna Magid suggests an alternative explanation to this word nidmesi. Nidmesi, again, may come from the word mes, misa. Woe is to me, because this has taken my life. But the Dubna Magid explains that the word nidmesi may actually come from the word dimyon, imagination. And Yeshayahu is saying over here, woe is to me, for I am living in a world in which I am imagining. Everything until now has been an illusion. What does that mean? So the Dubna Magid, in the way that only he could, explain this by way of a fascinating mashal. He explains that there was once a small town which had a very small population of Jews, and the people in this particular town were completely ignorant. They didn't really know all that much. And there was one individual who lived among them who was considered to be the wisest men among them. Although perhaps he didn't have the official title of being the Rav of the city, everybody treated him like he was the rabbi, he was the scholar, he was the sage of the city. And people would ask him very difficult shilas. Some of the very difficult shilas that they would ask was, when is Rosh Chodesh? Or when do I have yahrzeit for my father? Or when is my son going to become a bar mitzvah? Very difficult questions. What bracha do you make on pretzels? They would ask him. Is the OU kosher? These were the questions that they asked this very wise and sagely man. Now, the fact of the matter is, since no one else lived there who knew the answer to these questions, this man was considered to be a tremendous Eloi. He was considered to be a tremendous genius. Perhaps they called him the Gaon of this town, the genius. And he felt very good about himself, because after all, whenever somebody had a question, they came to him. Now, at one particular moment of time, he had to take a bit of a trip, and he travels to another town. This town is a little larger, and he comes and he sees a nice shul. So he goes inside the shul. He's waiting for them to start davening mincha, and he sees a small group of men, and they're sitting around and they're studying the Sefer Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a sefer which is devoted to explaining some of the Agaditas, some of the stories, if you will, in the Gemara. It's not a very challenging area of study per se, but he's sitting in and he's listening, and he doesn't understand what they're talking about. He's listening, and he sees these simple people who look like they just came from work, and he has no idea what they're talking about. He feels confused. He goes a few blocks away, And he goes to another shul, and here there's a Chaver Mishnayos, and they're discussing Mishnah. And you know that Mishnah, of course, you have to have background, you have to have some ability to work your way through the text, but it's not necessarily the most difficult and challenging of all of Torah texts. And here he sees people poring over the Mishnayos, having fascinating discussions, and again, he has no idea what they're talking about. And suddenly he is completely beside himself. He does not understand how it could be that his entire life he walked around thinking that he was the great Gon, he was the great Eloi, he knew the answer to every question. And now he sees that it's all been a farce, it's all been an illusion. He don't know, he knows nothing. So it's very nice that he knows when Rosh Chodesh is. And he says, Oili ki nidmesi. I have been deceiving myself. I have been living in a world of imagination. I thought that I knew so much, and look at me. I can't even understand a simple Mishnah. I can't make any sense of it about a simple Agadata. I don't know who they're talking about. I don't know what they're talking about. And here I thought all along that I was such a Torah scholar. So the Maggid explains that this is how Yeshayahu Navi responded to the moment in which he had this great moment of revelation. Until this point, he thought, being the great prophet that he was a person of stature. People would come and they would ask for advice. People would call him a man of God. And now he takes a look and he has this vision. He sees something extraordinary and he says, Oili ki nitmesi. I have been living in a world of illusion. Ki ish tmeis svasayim anochi. I'm a man of impure lips. I'm not really worthy of having the sort of reputation that I have earned. This is a very, very fascinating idea, a very fascinating explanation of this pasuk, and I think something that is very relevant to us in our generation. We live in a time which I believe has been called the age of information, or the information age. Perhaps it's called that because it has never been easier to access information. No longer do people have to go to libraries. They have to go ahead and find a book and take it off the shelf and to see exactly what it is that they're looking for, only to discover that's not the right book. We live in a world in which a person, not only from their desktop, but literally from their own hands, can take a device and access millions, billions of points of information just in an instant. And it's absolutely fascinating that a person has the ability to access all this information. And we could imagine for a moment that we are, in fact, really, really smart, intelligent people, because after all, we have access to all the information. I remember very vividly a story that goes back probably about 15 years ago, give or take, probably a little less than that. It was before anybody had smartphones. I don't know, remember exactly when the first iPhone came out, but it was before the iPhone. But it was texting was just becoming popular, so people were able to communicate through SMS texting. And there was a service, I don't remember what it's called, but probably somebody who's listening does. There was a service in which you can text any question you have, and within a few seconds you would get an answer. So if you wanted to know, what's the distance between the Earth and the Moon, so you would text it to this service, and within, I don't know, 5-10 seconds you'd get an answer. If you wanted to know, what is the capital of Alabama, so you put it in there, and suddenly you got your answer. It's great. It was a little, primitive compared to to a Google search. So I remember I was at a particular gathering. I actually remember where it was. Somebody was making a simcha in their backyard, and there were a group of people standing around playing with this and saying, wow, this is absolutely amazing. You could type in any question. So I said, yeah, let me see how that works. So I type in that, what time is mincha that day in Teaneck? It was an interesting question. What are the chances that they're going to know the answer to that question? What time is mincha in Teaneck? And I wait about 5 seconds, thinking there's not going to be any answer. And all of a sudden, a return message comes back. And the message was, Ashkenaz or Sfar. There you go. So already, before smartphones, access to information was already so accessible and so available to us. I remember when I started teaching, I would tell my students, listen, you're going to ask questions, and I'm not necessarily going to know all the answers to your questions, but I'm going to give you my word. And that is that if you ask me a question, give me 24 hours. And within 24 hours, I'll get back to you. I know who to call. I know how to look up questions. I know how to access that sort of information. Can you imagine if a Rebbe would say that to his students today? They would say, are you crazy? 24 hours? Why should it take you 24 hours to come up with an answer to my question? Give me a second. Let me take my phone out, and I will be able to Google it. I can ask Rav Google the question, and I will have an answer in an instant. Now, the problem is like this. It is true that we have access to lots and lots of information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are smarter. It doesn't mean that we are more intelligent. It doesn't mean that we are knowledgeable, nor does it mean that we are more equipped to be able to understand the things that we are trying to understand or to navigate our way through the world. Unfortunately, it has become more and more common for people today that when they have halachic shilas, when they have questions, they will go ahead and Google those questions. Now, to be clear, there's absolutely nothing wrong, in my opinion, with going ahead and doing a little research. The internet is a wonderful place to learn about Torah and to access and to research various halachic issues. However, if that is going to be the place that I go to paskin, if that is going to be the place that I go in order to find out what the halacha is in a situation that is less than 100% obvious, and there may be situations in which things are absolutely clear, so then I'm going to be doing myself a great disservice, because there are so many opportunities that a person has to truly be able to connect with Torah, to become connected to the process of Masorah by thinking about something, by learning, by discussing it with others, by developing and cultivating a relationship with the Torah, to simply go ahead and just Google a question and expect that that is a sufficient and appropriate methodology to be used in order to access Torah in its purest sense is unfortunately a great mistake. Oy lanu, woe is to us, because we live in this illusionary world. We live in a world in which we think because we have access to information that means that is the be-all and end-all. The reality is that the Gemara in Brachos Daf Chav Beis tells us, based on a pasuk in this week's parsha, "V'hodatem levanecha v'levnei vanecha," that you should inform, you should tell your children and your grandchildren about Yom Asher Amadatu Lefnei Hashem Elokecha B'chorev, about the day that you stood before Hashem your God B'chorev at Har Sinai. And the Gemara says, "Malo halan be'ema ubiyira bereses ubezio," just like over there at Har Sinai. That moment was a moment which was experienced with awe and with trepidation. It was a moment of great and profound reverence. It was a moment in which people were trembling. Afkan, so too. The experience of Talmud Torah should be one of Ema Yira Reses Aziyah. That doesn't mean that every time a person asks a shaila, every time a person is Mavir Sedra, all of a sudden they necessarily need to be quaking and shaking. However, the experience of Talmud Torah, the experience overall of connecting with Masorah, is one that is supposed to be a completely immersive experience. It is one in which we are supposed to be tapping into something which is powerful, something which is alive, something which requires more than just Googling. And so therefore, we have to remember that while we have many, many, many people today who are, all of us, not many people, anybody with an internet connection, anybody is able to go ahead and to access the World Wide Web and to connect to so many different people and places and things and to learn and to research, and that's all very wonderful. This is absolutely not a substitute. It is not a substitute for the true, real, authentic experience of the study of Torah, of researching Torah, and most importantly, of navigating our way through the labyrinth of halacha. That there is no substitute for asking questions, for researching things in a personal way, in which a person is able to make sure that the question that they are answering is one that is matin for them. Google may have ways of, through artificial intelligence, of figuring out the best websites to show you based on the way that you phrase a particular question. But in no way whatsoever does that mean that this artificial intelligence is any substitute for the actual intelligence and the emotional intelligence and the sensitivity of an actual human being. A posek who can go ahead and can receive a question and process it, not only through their mind, but through their soul as well. So there's nothing like that. So we should wake up. Yeshayahu Hanavi explains the Dubna Magid, thought, wow, look at me. I have access to so much. And then he had this moment and he says, we as well should realize that although it's true, we are very fortunate to have access to so much information. Let us never make the mistake to think that because of that, we have arrived. Because of that, we no longer need to struggle. We no longer need to push ourselves and go through the traditional channels of accessing Torah in its purest form. We should wake up from this dimyon, from this illusion, this world in which we live, and remind ourselves that just as the moment of Har Sinai, the moment of revelation at Sinai was, as the Gemara tells us, a moment of Ema, Yira, Reses, and Ziyah. So too, every time we study Torah, we connect to Torah, should also be a similar experience. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful Shabbos.